Thank you, Jochen. And Zeynep, thanks for that great introduction because it gave me more insights into the questions that I want to ask and gave all of us a lot more information that probably someone who didn't know Jochen so well wouldn't have been able to provide. So I always enjoy these conversations because you never know what's going to come up. But one thing that occurred to me is, and especially with your acceptance remarks, I mean, coming from where you came from and taking the initial jobs that you took, and then in terms of what we know about you from your bio and what Zeynep said, there must have been some transformation going on somewhere. And I'm just wondering, you know, who influenced your values and how did your maybe early life lead or have influence over who you've become now?
Well, that's definitely my family and my parents that influenced me the most. I mean, I was very fortunate to have had a very happy childhood growing up in the suburbs in a little town in Germany, and it was kind of a happy family, I would say. And my father was, and my parents overall, they always fought for the right side. He was actually a surgeon, a gynecologist, and he almost got fired because he introduced mammography in his hospital that he ran. And it was a Christian hospital, and at the time they said, sorry, we don't do these things in a Christian hospital. And he said, well, but I'm going to introduce it. And then they said, you're going to be fired. And he said, I'll do it anyway. They never did. They never fired him, but that was sort of that experience where the family was like, oh my God, he's going to lose his job. Where is he ever going to go? And so he stood up for it, and he did that a few times with my mother. And I guess that really shaped me and standing up for the right side. And I always say, keep your side of the pavement clean. And I try to do that every day.
That's a wonderful story, and I'm glad you were willing to share that with us. And there's so many things I want to ask you about. One is how you got to the Segera and to your rhino project and all of that. But I know that you have a video to share. And I personally want to see it, so I'm going to get off the stage while it shows.
No, not you stay. It's only 3 minutes, I think.
No, I know, but I want to see it. So can we show the video, and then I'll come back and ask more questions. That's beautiful. So, a lot of questions, but I guess I would start with how did you get from business to Segera, and then from Segera to the rhino sanctuary, the path that you took?
Yeah, I traveled to Africa for the first time in '89 and just fell in love with, actually Kenya was my first trip to Africa. And I decided very quickly that I would make Africa my home at some point in my life. And then a long search started over 14 years to find the right place. And then I came across these derelict cattle ranches that I had to decide very quickly, actually within 48 hours, if I should buy it or not, because there was another buyer. And when I look at the photos back then, if you looked at those photos, you would say he must have been crazy. I certainly was, because there was really nothing there other than a sense of belonging and feeling home. We wouldn't see a lion in 6 months. We would maybe see one elephant every week. There were no cheetahs. There were lots of animals that had disappeared. There were lots of fences that we had to take down. But it somehow sort of spoke to me, and that's when I took that crazy decision to transform the land. And it took 20 years to get us to what you've just seen. This film was shot only last year. So, I mean, give nature a break, you see what can happen. It's actually a little bigger than Manhattan. It's actually 3.4 times the size of Manhattan, but we don't have any skyscrapers.
Thank goodness.
So yeah, it just was sort of a 14-year search that sort of led me to know exactly what I wanted, and then that crazy idea came about. And there were a lot of firsts. First solar plant in Kenya, first high-end, fully sustainable tourist retreat that we opened 10 years ago, and many other firsts. And then I said, what's next? How can we really preserve this land for future generations? And at a time where biodiversity is and preserving biodiversity is so important, I felt that the rhino could be that symbol as the umbrella species that holds everything together. What we don't want is sort of little islands of preservation. What we want is connectivity. Yeah. And by connecting existing rhino sanctuaries, converting land that is not a rhino sanctuary, I believe we can preserve a large chunk that is several thousand square miles big into a big rhino sanctuary. And that's really sort of the dream that I've decided to come up with by bringing other stakeholders in. This is not just my initiative, there's others that do their part. But I want to start with Segera, some of our neighbors, and we're in the early stages of making it happen. And yeah, if there's
so you're combining landscapes.
Yeah, we're combining landscapes that eventually will be interconnected. And obviously the rhino is an important species, but what this does do also is to keep elephant migratory corridors open and just really provides an opportunity for wildlife to migrate. And especially in the last 3 years where we've had a terrible drought that, thank goodness, ended 4 weeks ago.
Oh, good.
You know, you could see where wildlife was able to roam freely from one place to another, depending where the pasture was still okay or water was available. And that's what we need. We don't need fences. We want one big area, and the rhino will serve as the umbrella.
And then bringing in female rangers, where did that come from?
I was actually at Sundance Film Festival, and there was a film with a guy who lives in Zimbabwe who started Akashinga and trained female rangers, and we got to know him, and I said, well, that's exactly what I want to do in East Africa, because there were no women in conservation. I mean, women in our communities do not have a job. They look after their children, and they never get paid for anything. They do all the work for free. And I said, this is exactly what we need, and women's empowerment is a very important foundation of my foundation, and everything we do to bring women into leadership positions and give them an opportunity. And that's what we did, and the first lot graduated 5 years ago, and it was national news in Kenya, and the Minister of Tourism and Wildlife came, and the President asked the question, why don't we have women in conservation? And from there, that changed really the way people look, and everyone around us started to to hire women, and we now have a very fast-growing number of women in conservation, which is fantastic.
And obviously, especially where there are rhinos, it's extremely challenging in terms of poachers and all of that. And actually, Zeynep and Myra and I were in Mexico recently, and she was showing us some of the moves that the women are trained to do. It was very powerful. But was there resistance from the communities?
No, not at all. There was, I think everyone was really grateful, and if you ever get a chance to watch the film, it's an incredible story of those 13 women that started and became empowered through the work they were doing. No, there was really no challenge, and I think our approach is not arm the women and make them fierce warriors. Our idea is that women nurture their family, nurture their children, and they are the calming voice in the community. So conservation starts with your community, and not by keeping people out, but by bringing people in, and by making sure that everybody is actually, part of the journey. And that's what we're trying to do by giving the power to the women, and that's really working now. It was quite interesting because first the men were kind of joking about it, didn't take them serious, and then when the training started, they became really good. They were like, "Ooh, we've got to step up to the plate here." So now they're working together, but it's been a wonderful experience, and it's great that it's having a ripple effect through other parts of Africa as well.
And these are clearly principles that you've also used in your business practices, and I knew beforehand a bit about your work at Harley-Davidson, but it sounds like it extends back to your work in Puma. So I'd love you to amplify a little bit on what Zeynep said, how you came to what you came to in terms of livable wages, in terms of non-discrimination, and some of the creative things you're doing in bridging leadership around inclusion, around who rides motorcycles.
That's a long story, I don't know.
No, we want to hear it.
Well, look, when I started, I became CEO of Puma when it was a bankrupt company at the time, 29, $100 million in sales. I was 29 when I was appointed. And in Germany at the time, it was kind of, there's no chance he's going to be successful, and he's going to crumble under the pressure. And I said, okay, let's see. But what I had to take some very tough decisions in the beginning to turn the business around, which included layoffs, moving manufacturing to Asia, and all of the things that you had to do at the time. But then very quickly I traveled to Asia and visited our factories, and it was a shocking experience, and it was all outsourced. You could have said, well, it's factories that we don't own that do what they do, but it was in terrible pollution. All the chemicals were washed into the river, and you walked through a factory, and within 5 minutes your eyes were red, and because of the fumes and everything else. So, and the conditions in the quarters, and it was 99% women that worked in the factories in China, were absolutely horrendous. And I was like, wow, this can't be us. So that was one experience. And at the same time, traveling to Africa and experience nature's destruction as well, and not just the beauty of it, just gave me that sort of connection to nature, and that's when it all started as a journey. But it started I was pretty much on my own, because at the time the word sustainability wasn't even born. We kind of started to talk about corporate social responsibility. But I remember when I presented the concept to the financial analysts in Germany, and then one journalist asked me, he's like, well, you are just the CEO of this company. You're behaving and talking as if it was your own company. And I said, well, I thought that's my job. As a CEO, you got to think long term, but there was zero understanding. So anyway, I started the journey, and I believe that business and philanthropy and working together can make a significant impact. And I realized that politicians and politics can only do so much, and often they don't. But business can be a significant force for good, and not just because it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing also for the business itself. So being inclusive, I think, is a critical component to success. So what we've done, just to give you a couple examples, so I started in another crisis. So my first job in New York, 87, financial crisis, and I started on the 1st of March of 2020, and I had to shut down the factories first, not knowing when I would open them.
No, wait, this was...
So it's Harley now.
Harley.
First was
Okay.
Puma, now Harley. So this is kind of my life. I always start with a crisis. And when we opened again, I went to see our factories and our workers in the factories, and the morale was, I've never experienced something like it as bad. Everyone was like, not because of the pandemic, but because they said, no CEO has ever come to us for years. You took everything away. You took the music away. You took our family events away. You took our rallies away. You didn't allow us to come to rallies anymore. And this is a place you don't want to work for. And I was like, well, the pride of Harley-Davidson is actually the craftsmanship that goes into our motorcycles that are all for the US market manufactured in America. And I said, we have to change that. So that was one of the first thing. And then I made everybody a shareholder in the company by issuing shares to everybody, including the workers in the factory. And that's the first.
So that's a big deal.
That was a big deal because we didn't know how the financial community would react. And making hourly workers shareholders was just never really practiced. So that was one of the things. And then I don't know how many riders are in this room. I've met a few though already. What's really great about riding a motorcycle is the community. And the more I get into it, and I started riding when I was 16, it's sort of a brother and sisterhood once you are in it. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what language you speak, what you look like. Once you're a rider, you're part of the community. And that's something in a time when everything is so divisive, is a huge asset that we as a company never celebrated. So that's what I did. I asked Jason Momoa to do some commercials for us, and the slogan was United We Ride. And we launched it just as we started to manufacture again, and that was sort of our comeback as a company into the world, opening our factories again and bringing everybody as diverse as we could possibly be as a business and a brand, and celebrate diversity and inclusion. And that's one of the reasons why I took the job, is because I believe in an incredible American icon and the transformation and the opportunity to contribute positively to a very divisive society.
I want to comment on that because one of the most striking books that I read was called Making Democracy Work by a political scientist named Robert Putnam. And it was about what made Northern Italy more effective economically, socially than Southern Italy. And they ran all kinds of correlations. And the highest correlation about the success of Northern Italy was the number of choral societies and soccer clubs. And the reason for that was exactly what you just said, that it had nothing to do with how you might interact in your family life or your work life, but it brought people together with very different backgrounds and created a common sense of joy and fun. And that is what we need, is the bridging over the bonding. The bonding is among like people. The bridging is across different people. And we talk about it very seriously, but it also has to be fun. And so this is a great example of that. Yeah. To me, by the way, everybody, this is an amazing going into the detail of what makes bridging, how you get to it and what the impact is. And I'm assuming that morale in your company is a whole lot better.
Yes, our engagement scores are, very high now, much higher than they were 3 years ago. They were at the rock bottom, and we had about 40% of the company employees that were disengaged, which means 40% of the company are not with you on the journey.
Right.
And it was, I took over and the company had done 4 years of restructuring. So 4 years in a row, people were laid off, and. So there was just, there was a difficult time. But again, it's a 120-year-old icon that can contribute positively to society. And then if you think about sustainability, I didn't say, now Harley is going to go sustainable, because that would have sounded a little strange, but instead we actually launched a new brand, a derivative of Harley-Davidson, and took it public at the New York Stock Exchange in September, which I'm still running myself as well. It's called Livewire, and it's a model that I initiated when I was on the board, started to be on the board of Harley 13 years ago, and I said Harley needs to think electric because one day the day will come when the world will be electric. So we started development that I was then able to implement and take it out of the mothership to set it up as a separate company. So again, we don't talk about environmental consciousness or sustainability. You know, Harley has committed itself to be carbon neutral by 2050, which takes longer because combustion for touring bikes is just, or electrification of touring bikes is very difficult. But LiveWire is going to be carbon neutral by 2035.
That's
so
great.
Again, it's sort of using business to transform without saying Harley's going sustainable.
Yeah. Thank you for all of this and for sharing it. I'm getting the evil eye from Jamie over here who's telling me that it's time for us to stop this wonderful conversation. But really, congratulations, Jochen, and you're such a deserving winner of this award.
Thank you very much.